if when rates kept going down, you or the people around you didn't have the common sense to refinance that, that was negligence.
In his most recent podcast, Chamath Palihapitiya shares his opinion regarding high inflation rates, the stock market, the crypto market, and the Fed.
The first is I thought DeSantis did a really good job just rolling with the punches.
Okay.
Because I think whether he wins, you're not going to look back on this moment as the defining moment of the campaign, nor whether he loses, will you say that this was where it all, the beginning of the end. Instead, what this was a really seminal moment, I think, in further divorcing ourselves away from the mainstream media. And you know that it was that important because Biden tried to troll the whole thing. Nick, you can show this link. This link works. And I actually think this is a really terrible idea by the Biden team because
never respond.
This basically acknowledges how important the moment was.
Yeah.
And the fact that even the president of the United States was grinding the link and couldn't get in because there was so much interest is really important. And I think what it speaks to is the fact that we are now showing credibly that you don't need to listen to 4 channels to shape your consciousness. And you can just go straight to the source. And what Sachs said is right. If you now have a moderated forum that then gets put out to 50 or 60 different Twitter spaces all at the same time, framing and reframing, it gives people a chance to come to their own conclusion in a totally unique way. So I think it was really, really an important moment for citizen journalism and podcasting and audio formats and all of the things that I think we've been a small part of. But I think that it's really must have tilted the mainstream media and it tilted the establishment. And you can see that in Biden's tweet.
Yeah, going direct.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing. Second thing, I think DeSantis did a really decent job in rolling with the whole thing and being super cool and just being committed to the process. And I think that says a lot about him as well, which was, again, it's a question mark. And I've said this before, the big money guys got close and then took a step back. So this could be a very good moment for them to reevaluate because I thought he did a very good job. I think that these third-party credit rating agencies are not particularly that accurate and sophisticated. They don't know anything that you don't know. They're not getting access to...
Moody's gave SVB an A rating the week before it went into receivership.
This is my exact point.
Well done.
This is my exact point. None of these companies know what they're doing. These companies are in the business of putting a letter on a document and then selling access to that document. So if you're going to trust these guys to know what they're saying, either right or wrong, independent of what side, you are outsourcing your decision-making to the wrong body. So whether it's S&P, Fitch, or Moody's, I would tell you to ignore it and come to your own conclusion. I think that this budget ceiling thing is happening now every couple of years. And it seems like the real thing we should be talking about is whether Biden's going to use the 14th Amendment and just ram a budget through. And I think that's...
Yeah.
So under the 14th Amendment, the President of the United States has in their discretion the ability to make sure that the United States can pay their debts. And that wasn't necessarily thought of as a way to work around the debt ceiling impasse. But because Congress refuses to pass any structural laws that allow the budget to ebb and flow with tax receipts, we get caught in this situation, again, roughly every handful of years. So what Biden could do is he could say, the 14th Amendment gives me the right, I'm going to pass a budget via executive order. From a game theory perspective, what that does is it forces Republicans to sue Biden, take him to the Supreme Court and say, this is unconstitutional. The problem with that is that probably really does tank the economy in the way that it creates enough uncertainty where capital markets freeze up and liquidity just absolutely goes away. And again, liquidity's been shrinking for the last 18 months anyways, so it'd get even worse. So I think the brinksmanship right now between McCarthy and Biden is basically that veiled threat. If Biden effectively isn't going to get something done, I think he's going to test the 14th Amendment. Now, if the 14th Amendment turns out to be a reasonable way in order to pass a budget, the good news is, not just for Biden, but for any future president, including Republican presidents, will not have to be held hostage by Congress. They will, in the 11th hour, be able to pass a budget that works. The implications of that, though, is that now you will not get consensus. And whatever's happening in that moment, you'll see more of. So if you have a spending president, they'll just continue to spend. And if you have an austerity president, they'll continue to cut. And that'll have implications on either side.
To win over the American public, to win over moderates with an austerity and a balance the budget message, or is it just too unpopular to even bring that up?
I just think that you guys don't psychologically understand how to get what you want. I think the best way to get what you want, which I would want too, which is a healthy economy where there's accountability for spending, is to not look at expenses. And all of this talk is always about expenses, but to look at revenue and limit revenue more drastically. And I think the best way to limit revenue dramatically at the federal and state level is to just minimize taxation as much as possible. And I think that is something that Democrats and Republicans have a hard time fighting. Nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I want new taxes. Nobody says that, right? And I think that if you attach that to some sort of spending guidelines, like what David says with a sensible foreign policy, you just end up spending a lot less. You want to fight a foreign war? Okay, great. Well, you know what? It's part of the existing budget. Let's go figure out why we want to do it. We want to have more accountability in defense spending. Okay, well, look, the defense budget is half of what it used to be because we just have half the revenue. I think that if you start to go and talk about austerity and cutting Social Security and healthcare benefits, it's literally a non-starter. People close their eyes, they plug their ears, and you get nowhere. Now, separately, I think the step even before you look at taxation, so minimizing government revenue, is to figure out how to refinance. So if you're a homeowner and you got a mortgage in the 80s, you were paying 12, 14, 15, 16%. If when rates kept going down, you or the people around you didn't have the common sense to refinance that, that was negligence. Similarly, we're in a position today to refinance our debt wall and push out these maturities past 100 plus years. We are the only country that has a viable, stable economy that looks like it can still continue to thrive at scale. Take advantage of that. You lose nothing by giving us the optionality, generating some 100-year debt, refinancing a bunch of this short-term stuff. And then second, inflation helps us. And it helps us because it allows us to inflate the value of these dollars that allows us to pay off our short-term maturities. So these are two practical, simple things that are uncontroversial that should happen today. And then separately, I think you need to look at minimizing revenue. And then you can cut expenses. But if you flip them around, I'm just telling you, it's not like I want any of this to happen, but I'm telling you nothing will change and you guys will still be crying wolf. In 5 years, it'll still be the same. It'll just be a different debt to GDP number that gives you anxiety. I think the best way to think about government spending is that in every dollar, there's probably 15 or 20 cents that actually does some good. There's probably 15 to 20 cents that's like on the margins, break even. And then the rest of it, which is half of it, is wasted. That's probably roughly accurate, right? You get things like TARP, which turned out to be a pretty decent program. There were things like the DOE loans that, got things like Tesla into the marketplace, right? There's things like the IRA today that'll de-lever ourselves and create a peace dividend because we won't need to fight over resources and oil from other countries. But the problem is that represents a minority of the dollars.